Today, we'll talk a great deal about some additional activities as they pertain to coal and coal utilization and the effect that it has on Kentuckians here in the Commonwealth, on companies like American Electric Power and Kentucky Power in particular. I guess I should start by saying to all the leadership Kentuckians, one of them our own, Mr. Mike, so I'm going to make sure I get this right, Mike Laszlo. It is an interesting thing. Some years ago I did something like that in the city of Detroit when I worked for American Natural Resources, and it really is an opportunity for you to learn a great deal about the Commonwealth, a great deal about the things that are going on, and it's nice to be chosen to be involved in a program like that. And it's interesting that they had you all sit up front so that you can be seen and be counted and be depended upon to ask appropriate questions, which I'm sure you'll do. One of the joys of following a keynote speaker is on occasion you can make comments on the comments that that person made in the previous presentation. And I did tell James Fallows that I wanted to make some comments in general because I'm an absolute believer in much of what he said, particularly that coal is bound to play worldwide. The resource base in India, in China, in Russia, throughout South America, and obviously here in North America, it is just, in Australia, it's absolutely observable that coal is going to play long term. Coal needs to be cleaner in that process, no question about that. It is a technology challenge, a challenge that we're all working on, and something that over time we will continue to improve the performance of coal. Our company, in one of our facilities in West Virginia over the last 4 years, has been deeply involved in not only demonstrating the carbon capture and storage as a viable technological solution, but has done so successfully with a chilled ammonia approach, which is simply an engineering answer to a very difficult and challenging situation. It was mentioned in the introduction that I've had the opportunity to be here before, and I have, and I enjoyed that. In fact, I think this is about the 6th or 7th time I've been in the Commonwealth to talk about one of my favorite issues, and that's how are we going to continue to have the economies of the United States and this Commonwealth grow as we see the challenges worldwide of import challenges, export challenges, countries like China and India moving forward at such a rapid pace, the effect that that's having on the economy here in the United States. The most recent economic downturn, which I guess is now termed the Great Recession, whether it's over or not is open to debate. If you're employed, it may seem like it's over. If you're not employed, I guess as Reagan said, a recession is when things are tough but you're employed. A depression is when things are tough and you're unemployed. And as we all know from this week's statistics, or last week's statistics, the employment challenges in the United States continue to reign. I thought it was interesting. One of the few people who asked questions of Mr. Fallows asked about an energy plan. There is nothing in the world more important that a country like America, the largest energy consumer in general, but not overall now with China moving forward as fast as they are on a per capita basis, a monster in energy consumption compared to other countries. We have no energy plan. We have never had an energy plan, and I don't know that we'll ever get an energy plan because it requires a balance between competing fuels in the energy sector alone, as well as a balance between the effect of cost-effective and reliable energy being available, not just electrical energy, but natural gas, and you see the battles that are on the front in the shale gas activity, but most importantly in liquid transportation fuels. You know and I know that we approach that in as reasonable a fashion as we can. You're seeing electric vehicles take a much larger place in the marketplace, but think about the competition that goes on even there. You're beginning to see commercials now where the Leaf, a Nissan entry into the marketplace, is saying we never stop at a gas station compared to the Prius that must stop at a gas station on occasion, and even the Volt, which occasionally needs to do that. And when you think about natural gas as a transportation fuel, and it could be and should be, you see that my good friend Boone Pickens and the Pickens plan is under attack by the big chemical companies because they want natural gas to turn it into chemical products that they can take to market. They don't want the price impact that would go on by chemicals or by natural gas being used particularly for the large truck over-the-road transportation model that Pickens is so adamant about and such a great advocate for. And over time, you'll see that same kind of pressure on what we all believe in the energy supply business, the electrical energy supply business, which is that the fleet will generally turn to shale gas, and it will do so in a relatively rapid sense. And there will be counter pressures galore on that as well. So I wish that I could stand in front of you and say, happened to be in Washington yesterday, that they're eager to work on an energy plan. Right now they're preoccupied with something about their checkbook and their balance things that you and I deal with every day. You'd think they'd be able to deal with them. Even though they have a few more zeros than you and I deal with, they seem to be unable to get that done. You know, it's interesting, not only have I had a chance to be in Kentucky many times, and you heard about the titles, that makes me also president or chairman and chief executive officer of Kentucky Power Company, so we have a great affinity to our customers in the eastern side of the state, although on occasion when we do rate adjustments, I appreciate that all of you would like electricity for free. I would too. That's not going to happen, because I would like everything that you all do for a living for free too. And I expect you would tell me the same thing. That's not going to happen. But we continue to take that responsibility to serve that economically depressed part of the state as efficiently and cost effectively as we can, and we will continue to have that as our goal. And some years ago, it was mentioned in the biography that I have a couple of degrees from Eastern Michigan University. There was a time in my life where I thought I wanted to be a biology teacher, so my bachelor's and master's degree are in biology. And thank President Nixon for, after I was done with military service, he had created the Environmental Protection Agency. Today I'm not so sure about that, but back then I thought that was a great thing because it gave me an opportunity to have a job rather than a teacher. And one of the very first and most interesting assignments I worked on as a young environmentalist was doing the original environmental impact statement for the East Bend Bottom Power Plant in Boone County, Kentucky. So we have a sure affinity for your state. What I'm here to talk about today is coal under attack. Where does that leave Kentucky? And let me try to set the stage for you about what we meant when we did that. They asked some months ago, would you be happy to do this? Of course I'd be happy to do this. What would you talk about? Well, whatever you'd like me to talk about. Obviously, we want to talk about coal, the utilization of coal, the potential environmental challenges that face that. And then, as all good organizers of events like this do, they call back later and say, well, we need a title. And I'm not one to prepare a speech. I think it's really almost an offense to the audience to stand in front of them and read a speech. I say, why don't you just mail it to me, I'll read it and see if I liked it. So I usually don't have any prepared remarks in that sense. So I came up with that title. And that was a time when it was in the mindset of the Federal Environmental Protection Agency that they would pass a series of laws, some pursuant to the Clean Air Act as it exists, and others pursuant to what they interpreted as a Supreme Court directive to address the issue of carbon and carbon emissions that had everything to do with an automobile case, Massachusetts versus the EPA, on the issue of tailpipe emissions as it pertains to carbon. And what the Supreme Court said was, you must regulate carbon. The Supreme Court said you must do a determination of whether or not you believe carbon has a deleterious effect on the health or well-being of the United States. And if you come to that conclusion, then under the Clean Air Act you have the authority to go ahead and regulate carbon. The Bush administration, having that same challenge in front of them, determined that that wasn't the case and they weren't about to regulate carbon. The Obama administration, however, on the day they got there, they said, we're going to take that endangerment finding, and the Bush administration relook at it. And with almost no data and with almost no transparency, decided that, in fact, carbon is an endangerment issue, and therefore they're going to regulate CO2, and they're in the midst of doing that today. So the attack on coal that we see today is multifaceted, some of it under the auspices of the Clean Air Act, as mentioned, and some of it under the addendum to the Clean Air Act authority given by the Massachusetts v. EPA case, if and only if you find an endangerment that CO2, in fact, is such an endangering pollutant. Now, you and I, of course, are in the business of exhaling CO2 even now as we sit here, so you're endangering the environment, as you're here, and I'm sure you're all worried about that. The beauty of that is that all those lovely trees that come out most of the months and the years around this country are happy to take that CO2 in and hand back oxygen to us. Somebody had a heck of a plan. Gee, I thought that might get at least a chuckle out of all of you. So we began this process, we in the electric supply business, coal being one of the major players. You may recall back in the 60s and 70s, early 70s, about 20% of the electricity generated mostly in the northeastern quadrant of the United States was oil-based. And after the oil embargoes of 73 and 79, oil disappeared. And every time you hear a politician talk about energy independence, we've got to do something about the electrical supply. We've got to make sure we have energy independence. We've got to quit using oil. Hello, we don't use oil to generate electricity, and we haven't since the 73, 79 embargoes. It, in fact, just got too expensive. And then there was a point in time when Carl Baggy of the National Coal Association convinced Congress that we were running out of natural gas. This is back when, just before Jimmy Carter became president, and he said, since we're running out of natural gas as a resource base, it's finite, we should use it only to heat our homes and dry our clothes. Whatever you do, don't use it to generate electricity. So we as an industry were headed down the road of nuclear and headed down the road of coal in a very large way. And it's always interesting, people talk about Moore's Law. You heard Mr. Fallows talk about Moore's Law, which is a computer theory of the minute you create it, it's going to get cheaper tomorrow. Every time we built a larger coal plant in the American electric power system, the cost of electricity went down because of the efficiencies of the scale of the economics of building a bigger and bigger plant, until we finally got to the ultimate design on our system of building power plants that are 1,300 megawatts. And they produce energy for 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a fantastic cost for a product that's worth much more than that in the reality of the way you and I put it to use. So notwithstanding that, after 3 Mile Island, nuclear came under great pressure, and coal became the dominant player. Over 60% of all the energy produced in this country was coal-based, and the environmental movement began to gain great strength. And in the 1970s, the 1980s, and then ultimately in the 90s, the Clean Air Act came forward in a very appropriate way, came out with programs that I thought were nonsense when they originally came up with something that said, we'll cap the amount of emissions, we'll give you some allocations, you can trade them among yourselves, and everybody will go to heaven, no one will have to die. It really worked out relatively well. And so today's coal fleet, which represents about 50% of all of the capacity of generation in this country, and surely north of 50% of all of the kilowatt hours produced in this country, does so in a much cleaner sense than it did before. The AEP fleet, which is the largest coal-based generation fleet in the United States, our emissions are 80% less of sulfur dioxides, nitrogen oxides, and mercury than they were in the 1980s. So by 2010, we had spent on the order of $7 or $8 billion overall cleaning up the flue gas of our power plant productions and reduced those emissions by about 80%, which we thought was an excellent approach and something that had timelines that worked and approach that worked. 2 years ago when we were here, we talked at length about carbon and about cap and trade. We were a big proponent of cap and trade because we thought with the same design that the Clean Air Act approached those issues of SOx, NOx, and mercury in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it might work again. Things that are round and work really well don't need to be recreated each and every day. Let's take that model and put it to work on carbon. We were a bit of an outlier. In fact, I had the honor to be on the show with Governor Huckabee about a year or so ago, and I was standing for the proposition that cap and trade was probably an appropriate way to tackle the carbon issue because it worked on SOx and NOx and mercury. And the audience booed me, and that's okay, I can handle that. And then the most devastating call, I got home and my older sister called and said, "Have you lost your mind?" And I said, "Well, no, Shirley, I haven't. I'm just telling you that this is an appropriate way to attack that issue." She said, "Well, this is nonsense." I said, "Well, we'll talk about it another day." I learned years and years ago, pay attention to your big sister. But The fact of the matter is it didn't work. We couldn't get it through the Senate. We couldn't get it designed appropriately. The way it was finally designed had a tremendous amount of benefits for people in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Our Big Sandy plant and our Kentucky footprint would have had enough allocations to cover the early years, and we would have had an incentive to go forward and build the carbon capture and storage technology that we were developing over in West Virginia and put that on at no cost to our customers. In fact, a benefit to both our customers and our shareholders, because they were incenting you to put the hardware on your station at $80 or $90 a ton of carbon captured, and our price model told us we could do that for something less than that. And our thought was, that's fine, we'll take whatever the delta between the cost and the incentive, share half of it with our customers, keep half of it for our shareholders. And we thought that that was a really well thought through approach. Didn't work out, couldn't get it done. So, as you may remember, the administration said, well, if we can't, I remember sitting in a meeting with Carol Browner, her and I just sitting right across the table from each other, staring daggers as politely as we could. And she said, well, if you guys won't support this final bill in the Senate, then we'll just have to do it through executive order in the EPA. And I said, you know, Madam Czar, you can do whatever you've got to do. Eventually that's going to shut power plants down in the United States, and eventually the U.S. citizens will rise up and say, I would just as soon have my power plant on as off. So why don't we make some compromise here? And I'm sure if she could have, I would have been a rest in peace person at the time. It wasn't a very comfortable meeting, to say the least. But it is a practical reality of the challenges that we face. So today, now the 2010s, the EPA is coming up with new rules, as I mentioned, under the Clean Air Act. Rules to, again, reduce by about another 70+% the SOx emissions, the NOx emissions, the mercury emissions. So there are 6 rules that are coming out in a seriatim of time. When I selected this topic under the draft proposal that was out just for what was called the Clean Air Transport Rule, which is the state of Kentucky having some effect on the states east of us and the states west of you having some effect on your air quality because of the way that air pollutants travel by air, as you might well imagine. We were fearful that that would have a huge impact on the U.S. Fleet. We were fearful that would have a huge impact on the AEP fleet. In fact, our data tells us that we will shut down 6,000 megawatts of our current 40,000 megawatt plant in compliance with those draft rules. Nationally, that number is as big as 60 or 80,000 megawatts out of the U.S. fleet of 350,000 megawatts of baseload generation. So you can see that this is quite an interesting discussion that we're going into today. The EPA, God bless them for the work that they do, their data says that we'll shut down 10,000 megawatts in the totality of these rules. We're going to shut down 6,000 at American Electric Power alone. That means the rest of the country is only going to shut down 4,000. I doubt it. I doubt it very highly. We're going to spend somewhere between $6 and $8 billion to retrofit, remodernize the rest of our fleet to hit these new standards under the Clean Air Act. That doesn't even touch the carbon piece that I spoke about a few moments ago. They say that these rules will increase the cost of electricity by about $800 million a year across the entire country. In the AEP fleet alone, over the next 4 years, we will spend $8 billion. So that means the rest of the country is going to do it for free. They suggest that we should have all of this done by 2015. They're going to have a final rule in place in 2012. That gives us 36 months to do these projects. They're going to cost $6 to $8 billion. First, we need to go to the Kentucky Public Service Commission, get authority to do it. And the very environmental folks who are arguing for these rules to come in place will intervene in that case, saying, don't let them spend the money on that plant, make them shut that plant down.